Greetings, and welcome to Lobes and Robes, How Neuroscience Can Change the World. This podcast is sponsored by the American University Center for Neuroscience and Behavior and explores the links between neuroscience and key policy questions. I'm Colin Saldana, a professor of neuroscience and the director of the Center for Neuroscience and Behavior. My co-host is Dr. Gustavo Ribeiro, Associate Professor of Law at Washington College of Law, American University. This podcast is for anyone interested in how scientific discovery can make the world a better place. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to another edition of Lobes and Robes. Today, we have the great pleasure of speaking with Professor Dennis Patterson, the Board of Governors Professor of Law at Rutgers Law School. Professor Patterson holds a PhD in philosophy and a JD from the University of Buffalo. He is the author of numerous books and articles in both commercial law and legal philosophy, including seminal works on the philosophical foundations of law and neuroscience. He's a true giant in the field. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that auspicious introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Now, Dennis, you have written extensively about, again, the conceptual and philosophical foundations of law and neuroscience. What got you interested in these topics to begin with?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a philosopher by training, and neuroscience is certainly an easy analog to move into from the philosophy of mind. The questions in the philosophy of mind, like the nature of thought, what's the difference between cognition and thinking, reducibility of mind to brain, these topics really lend themselves to philosophical treatment. So I've known my co-author, Mike Pardo, for decades, and we were at a meeting of the Association of American Law Schools in New York. And we met in a bar, we're having a drink, and I said, Mike, I think this is going to be the next big thing in legal theory. And he's similarly interested, and he agreed. I took out a napkin, and I said, these are the 5 topics that I think people are going to want to talk about. And we sketched an article on the napkin that day, and that article became the basis of our book. So we published the piece, we took criticisms, we workshopped it in various places, and at the end of the day, it took 5 years to write the book. Some of the chapters were very difficult to finish, but we wanted to do a book that addressed both the philosophical questions and answered the question was, how does any of this make any difference for the law? So we split the writing, and then we rewrote each other's chapters, and at the end of the day, we had a book.
And that's Mind, Brains, and Law.
Right.
Came out by Oxford University in 2013. A truly terrific book. Now, in that book, you and Mike Pardo, your co-author and my good friend, describe yourself as naturalists who are nonetheless skeptical of what you term Neuro-reductionism. How do you explain that distinction to lawyers or neuroscientists without a philosophical background?
Well, naturalism is a philosophical point of view. Willard Van Orman Quine is generally regarded as the consummate example of an American philosopher who does his work from the naturalist point of view. But what's naturalism? So naturalism is choose any explanation of a phenomenon that has a kind of a ghostly, spiritual, non-material kind of explanation. But that is just a very general account. You have to figure out what's the difference between a conceptual question, an empirical question, how does metaphysics play into this, if at all? And so for non-specialists, the basic question is the mind reducible to the brain? Is it enough to explain a particular thought process or an emotion simply by saying, well, it's reducible to whatever goes on in the brain cognitively and physically. That's the central question of the field. It remains contested, and we are decidedly in the anti-reductionist camp. So while we're naturalists, we believe in natural explanations of natural phenomena, we don't agree that the mind is reducible to the brain.
Dr. Patterson, you just made me flash back to about 35 years ago in graduate school, where I was trained in part by a number of psychophysicists, as well as sensation and perception psychologists. And we had a slightly different take on what you just said. One of the central questions we grappled with as graduate students was how the brain maps onto the mind. That's the way we phrased it. Do you think there is a difference between how the brain enables the mind and how the brain maps onto the mind?
Well, no one has an account of how the brain enables the mind. No one. So I don't know how you would map it, what a mapping would look like. I mean, you can correlate, with an fMRI, you can correlate cognitive reaction to a question or a stimulus. And if you think that's what constitutes mapping, then fine, I would say, that's what you're doing. But you're not gaining any insight into the phenomenon of thinking by engaging in that task.
Understood. Do you think there is going to be a point where we could use the terms brain and mind interchangeably?
Plenty of people do it now, but they're mistaken.
That's not what I asked you, sir.
You left out the adverb successfully. Yeah. Can somebody successfully do it? I'm in the camp of never say never about anything, but count me as dubious. Together with my good friend Stephen Morse, we think that's one of the central questions. And neither one of us is willing to say never, but we are skeptical. Yeah, we are decidedly skeptical.
Well, let's imagine that your skepticism was, let's just say, calmed, and someone was successful in mapping the brain onto the mind. How do you think the legal system would change?
Well, if you could, as you know, the Daubert test, the Daubert case, sets the standard for this and for the use of such evidence in courts. Now, if you could do that successfully, then I think things like criminal prosecutions would be much easier. You could just take the mapping data that you've described and put that in evidence and say, this conclusively shows that the witness did not have the cognitive event of witnessing the robbery or intentionality, right? We can determine at the time of the commission of the homicide that the criminal defendant had the requisite intent so that the crime is murder and not manslaughter.
I see.
So it would be very useful. Very useful. And if somebody does it, I'll be the first one to say chapeau.
So Dennis, let me flip Colin's question around. And if we buy the non-reductionist claim that you and Mike defended, again, that the mind cannot be reduced to just the brain and its neurophysiology, what are the consequences of that to the legal system and to this law and neuroscience field?
Well, if you can't do that, then you're left with what we already have, which is looking at an evidential base and drawing an inference. That's what juries do. They listen to the evidence, physical, verbal, visual, and they decide on the basis of inference, based on the behavior that I see, the person in question had a particular cognitive state at the requisite time in criminal cases when the crime was committed.
Right, but I read, and correct me if I misread your remark, that your point is it's not only that we don't have a full evidentiary picture, but there's something conceptually has gone awry when we're trying to do the reductionist enterprise.
I see.
That to say, you use an example such as lying or knowledge or even morality or free will,
Right.
that there's something about this, that neuroscience is being deployed in law even before the conceptual foundations are solid. So when we use neuroscience to explain certain mental states that are relevant to law, it's not only waiting to all the evidence is in, but there's something conceptually gone wrong. So can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure. So in the book, we draw a distinction, and the distinction is fundamental. And it's a distinction between a conceptual question and an empirical question. And our argument is that one is not reducible to the other. The mapping folks want to elide or get rid of this distinction. And you gave the example of lying. What constitutes lying is not a fact. No fact, and this is a conceptual argument. This is about the nature of conceptuality. No physical evidence of any kind can tell you what a lie is. We decide it's a question of meaning, it's a question of what's in the statutes. We decide what constitutes lying. And you can have then evidence that so-and-so was lying on a particular occasion. But this is the important point. In order to make the judgment that someone is lying, you already have to have a conception of lying that you deploy, that you use, that you operationalize, that you're desideratum. And the question of what constitutes lying can only be answered by what Peter Hacker, following Wittgenstein, would argue is a grammatical enterprise. How is the concept of lying woven into a variety of other concepts? How does it make contact with them, like deception or misleading? And in order to make the judgment that someone is on a particular occasion misleading or lying or dissembling, you first have to know what it is that you are looking at. And so in order to do that, you have to figure out basically what the concept means. And to do that, you have to look at how it's deployed across a variety of contexts. And in this regard, I would recommend to anybody listening to this program the book by Peter Hacker and Max Bennett, which is now in its second edition, The Philosophical Foundations of Neuroscience. In that book, Hacker, the premier interpreter of Wittgenstein, and Max Bennett, a world-class neuroscientist from the University of Sydney, show how this distinction cuts across all kinds of neuroscientific topics: memory, vision, imagination, remembering. So it's quite a complicated set of undertakings. It's a complicated set of investigations, but it's all grounded in the conceptual empirical distinction.
Right.
Yeah. So let me leave it there for the moment for that.
So one of the things that I started thinking about, Dr. Patterson, while you were answering the last question, was what can neuroscience contribute to questions about knowledge or intent in criminal law cases? Is there any contribution that neuroscience can make?
No, nothing, zero.
Could you tell me why?
Because neuroscience is an empirical enterprise. Neuroscience investigates facts about the brain. And facts do not enable us to decide the content of our concepts. So, for example, just take your example again, lying. Tell me some fact that would illuminate the concept of lying.
The ability to ask if what a witness is telling you maps onto the fact of the case.
Well, that question is X lying in this particular instance, but it doesn't tell us anything about lying. It only tells us whether X is lying or not. That's the question you set yourself.
Okay.
So if the challenge that Colin first identified, if someone were able to produce enough studies to map on the brain into the mind, or I guess the other way around, such that the legal community, Congress was convinced of that enterprise and passed a law that defined a bunch of relevant mental states as meaning only their neurophysiological expression.
Yes.
Could then neuroscience contribute to the law? Would your challenge then be met? Or again, is it only a conceptual question such that if we change the concepts of those mental states to mean just their neurophysiological expression, then we are I assume in a very different world, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that would be what philosophers call the definitional stop. That is, you simply ex cathedra declare that a concept like intention means this. And the only evidence that we're going to allow in court to prove or disprove that someone had a particular intention at a particular time is the empirical results of an investigation. If you just simply define it, then of course you're going to get exactly what you described. But that's not an accomplishment of any, that's just an ex cathedra dictate about what constitutes intentionality. I would say the law rests on a mistake, but it remains the law. There's no progress here.
What do you mean the law rests on a mistake? You mean that new law that defines mental states in terms of would be a mistake, or a current law? What's the mistake there?
The mistake is in thinking that you can, I assume the law strives to be correct.
Hopefully.
Well, one would hope so. The mistake is in thinking that you've actually done what you set out to do. That is, you declare intentionality means this and only this. And henceforth, the law is going to address questions of intentionality this way. Okay, you can do that, but it's not an accomplishment. Why? Because the underlying problem of the conceptual and the empirical remains, but you've just defined it out of existence.
Right. So it's your contention that there will be something, of course, you're changing the meaning of concepts, and you can do that by fiat, but you'll be talking about a different phenomenon than that we currently refer to when we refer to all these different mental states,
yes.
knowledge,
absolutely.
lie. Presumably, you will be leaving a lot of stuff out.
Yes.
By reducing it to, right?
I was going to ask about the various, I've sometimes argued that neuroscience is the perfect garbage pail term, because you have this amazingly large spectrum of skill sets that are all trying to understand either how the brain works or how the central nervous system works. And then there's a small group of us, mostly trained as psychologists, who are not really going towards fMRI or measurement of a certain hormone or looking at a particular protein gets activated or not. But we're trying to understand behavior. Okay. We're trying to figure out what an organism actually does when presented with a particular problem. And if we do this correctly, then the problem that we can present the subject or subjects, one group ought to find it easier to solve the problem, whereas the experimental group should not. Here's my question after that incredibly long diatribe. Is behavior different from biology in your thinking?
Absolutely. Sure. No question about it.
I think I know why it's different. Could you tell me why you think it is?
Well, let's take an example. Suppose someone is standing at a street corner.
Standing, yeah.
And they're not moving. What are they doing? What's their behavior? Now, well, maybe they're waiting for a bus. Maybe they're waiting for a friend. Or maybe they've moved into position to signal their co-conspirator that the person whose house they're going to rob has just left. So if you don't know the underlying facts, you really can't tell what the, quote, behavior is. And I would suspect that the mental state, as measured by the cognitive, by the biology, the underlying biology, is actually the same in all three instances, but the behavior has a different meaning. And in order to discern that, the particulars of the context. So I would say that that's an example.
Understood.
It's a counterexample to the claim that you can always reduce behavior to biology, to use your terms.
Then it's been over 10 years. So your book with Michael Pardo came out in 2013. So it's been over a decade. Has the field listened to your critique?
Has the field listened? Well, like any field, there are still many cheerleaders for the reductionist view. But I think most people have not had their minds changed one way or the other. The reductionists whom I've engaged at conferences and in reviews of their books don't indicate any change of heart. They remain of the view that the reductionist project is alive and well. But they don't have much to show for it. Courts don't regularly admit this evidence. There's still a lot of contestation in the literature about whether the reductionist view makes any sense. And people have trouble, if I could put it that way, some people have trouble figuring out the role of their metaphysical claims in their reductionist project. And until they get clear about that, they're not going to make any real progress. Colin McGinn, who's a great philosopher, wrote a review of a book on the philosophy of art where the author said, aesthetic experience is reducible to what goes on in the brain when you look at a painting. Now, what the author of that book didn't understand is that that's a metaphysical claim. That's a claim that it can neither be proven nor disproven. Its cogency depends on the degree to which it can separate the empirical from the behavioral and the conceptual. And metaphysical claims, they abound everywhere in philosophy. But you ask yourself the question, whose view of metaphysics is correct? Aristotle, Kant, Hegel, Willard Quine? And of course, the answer is, I don't even know what it means to say that a metaphysical view is correct, because coherence is really the measure of metaphysical claims. And McGinn, in that review, does a very good job of explaining how the author simply blows right past these questions.
Dr. Patterson's response reminded me of brain overclaim syndrome, a term that's more.
Yeah, that's more. Right.
Is this what you're talking about? That the reductionists are stretching
it
incorrectly?
Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay. Can you discuss this for our viewers and explain the legal implications of this overreach?
Well, it's discussing the overreach is pressing the claim that all mental activity, like the aesthetic experience of looking at a painting, is reducible to what goes on in the brain. And the overclaim is getting rid of the mental element that is different from the behavioral, or the cognitive and the biological, the neurobiological. And Morse has used this to good effect in his work on addiction and talking about agency and addiction and choice and the like.
As someone who does not know very much about philosophy at all, the group of philosophers whom I did study in graduate school were largely the empiricists, the British empiricists, who were asking questions about how do we know what we experience is real. And I haven't heard any of them mentioned in this discussion. Why is that?
So you're talking about people like Hume and Bertrand Russell and the like?
Correct. And, Newton's work, if anything. Yeah.
Newton. Okay, Isaac Newton.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't consider Isaac Newton a philosopher.
No.
No, I wouldn't. Sorry.
It's okay.
Great scientist, but he has no philosophical chops as far as I'm aware. So
He's not smart enough.
I'm sure he was quite smart, although he lost all his money in the tulip mania. But I would say, so British empiricism. So what is British empiricism? What is its central claims? Its central claim is that everything behaviorally can be explained by and is reducible to sense data, right? So all of our knowledge of the world comes from sense data. That's the central claim of empiricism. If I may, there are two kinds of people in the world, the British and the French. The British, starting with Hume, G.E. Moore, even somebody like Bradley, certainly Bertrand Russell, believe that all of experience is reducible to sensory input. Right? And so our knowledge of the world comes from that sensory input. The French, on the other hand, Descartes, are rationalists, and they believe that our knowledge of the world comes from our conceptual architecture. Somebody like Descartes is the philosophical example, but in linguistics, the example is Noam Chomsky. Chomsky's theory of generative grammar is a rationalist theory. Kids understand language and thus the world because they're already pre-wired to assimilate the input that they get from the world, but it's organized conceptually. It's organized by a grammar that is, quote, built into all persons. Just a little story for your readers or your listeners, and maybe you guys remember this. But you remember B.F. Skinner?
Uh-huh. Yes, absolutely.
The great behaviorist,
Yep.
right? Now, Skinner argued that in a book called Verbal Behavior, he said all verbal behavior is learned by children on the basis of stimulus and response. So when a child correctly understands a verbal prompt, they are rewarded. And when they understand it incorrectly, they are told that's incorrect. It's a negative stimulus. But his argument in verbal behavior was that all language acquisition follows this model. In a review of that book, Chomsky demolished the theory with the following observation.
Right.
He said, well, if that's true, then what explains children uttering sentences they've never heard before? That was it. The book was done. Skinner looked like a fool, and Chomsky hit a home run. And that was his first big, in terms of impact, publication. And it was an absolutely fantastic use of counterexample. With one simple question, he demolished the prevailing view in psychology of language acquisition. Something else had to be right. It was absolutely magnificent. Now, no one under the age of 50 has ever read that review. I've never met anyone who's read it, let alone even knows that it exists. But it's a fantastic thing to teach graduate students. All you have to do is do what Wittgenstein said. You have to ask the right question. And that's what Chomsky did. He asked the right question, and the theory of stimulus and response to explain verbal behavior was vanquished.
It's quite an episode of a mic drop in academic circles.
Oh, right. I guess that's what you call, I guess that's what people mean when they say mic drop, right? Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah. So would you say Chomsky had the mic drop? Is that how that phrase is used?
I think that's right. Yeah, you drop the mic and then you'd leave.
Yeah, I think that's very true. But I'd argue that I think the mic drop echoed for quite a while because that story is the one that I learned in graduate school because it motivated Herb Terrace to ask questions about guerrilla language by looking for these conceptual jumps that Chomsky pointed out were lacking in Skinner's interpretation of it. And so once Nim Chimpsky, the ape, could learn individual words and had a limited ability to convey the idea that he could understand them.
Right.
Terrace wrote about having no evidence that the monkey could conceptualize and express an idea using the words that he already knew. And I think that would be the scientific fallout of that mic drop, which was clearly a very, very important movement that may have nailed the coffin shut, if you will, for a lot of Skinner stuff.
All right, I got to thank you guys for explaining mic drop to me in the context of the history of psychology. That's good. Thank you for that.
Dennis, looking ahead, what do you think is next in the field? Do you think the reductionists are still going to keep arguing amongst themselves about who has the best, latest fMRI because, old habits die hard?
Oh, sure. Nothing much has happened in law and neuroscience in years. There's been no real breakthrough of any kind. I think the field is sort of stagnant. But the themes that we have discussed this afternoon are the themes that organize the field. And I think that the more people read books like Morse and Bennett and Hacker, I think the non-reductionists amongst us will eventually triumph.
And of course, your own book.
Well, no, I don't know. I mean, I've asked Mike on occasion.
I wasn't asking, I was asserting. That's true.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for that. I've thought about, I said to Mike once, well, maybe we should do like a second edition or something. But we're busy with other projects and we haven't gotten around to it. But I mean, it would be a valuable enterprise. But I'm going to leave it to you guys to write the next book.
Or at least talk to the people who write the next book.
Because I think I have the book here in front of me. So did you guys like the cover? Do you know what the cover is?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I have a version without the dust cover, so enlighten me.
Oh, that's a pity. That's a pity. So the cover, this is great. The cover is a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, and it's called The Stone of Insanity. And what you have is a doctor engaging in a process which is still done. It's called trepanning, where you have tremendous cranial pressure and you want to relieve it. So you pierce the skull of the patient. And in the picture, the doctor has a dunce cap on. It's a funnel upside down. And Bosch is making fun of the doctor. The stupidity is thinking that you could cure insanity by opening up somebody's head and picking the parts out. And I saw this painting in a law and neuroscience presentation when I was in Florence. I had a graduate student working with me, and she did a presentation, and she put this painting up in the course of it. And I said, oh, that's the cover right there. That's it. That's it. Because just as it was insane to think that you could cure insanity by looking in the brain, it's equally insane to think that you could find the mind by looking in the brain. So we put it on the cover, and I'll send you a copy of the book. You shouldn't have a book without a cover. And that's a normative judgment. That's neither conceptual nor empirical.
Dr. Patterson, I have to ask, you started this conversation about you and Dr. Pardo sitting in a bar and sketching something out on a cocktail napkin.
Yes.
Do you still have that napkin?
No, I don't, regrettably.
Oh, that's too bad.
It's terrible. It's terrible. I should have kept it. I kept it for a while. It might be in a book. I'm sitting here in my house in Pennsylvania, and I find things like theater tickets and museum entrances in books all the time. I found the original playbill of Tom Stoppard's play, The Real Thing, when Felicity Kendall was in it. So I have things like that. And I might have the napkin somewhere, but I think the napkin belongs framed on the wall. That would really be where it should go.
Absolutely.
But
I agree.
It's so funny. The things that, for the young people that are listening to this, don't ever think that it's ever easy getting a book published. It's not. This book, I distinctly remember dealing with the editor at Oxford, a woman who's no longer there, about the design of the cover. And, we just went on and on for weeks about this. It was really awful because in the Bosch picture, there's a spire in the distance and your eye naturally goes to it. And she wanted to cover that up. And I said, no, you can't do that. It ruins the whole effect of the... But anyway, it was a lot of fun to write this book with Professor Pardo. He's an absolutely first-rate evidence scholar and a great person to work with. But as I said, it took 5 years. It wasn't small potatoes. We really, for this interview, I went back and read the book again. And I distinctly remember Chapter 2, The Concept of Mind, took me about a year to write.
Wow.
It's amazing. 25 pages. And it's just, yeah.
Well, it's a real contribution for sure.
Well, thanks. I mean, I appreciate that immensely. It's always, writing a book is a great thing, but it's never easy. And getting it published is never easy either.
And you have a new book coming out, right?
Well, it's out.
It's out. It's the weaponization of expertise with Jacob Hussel.
Right. So I'll tell you briefly about that book. So that book, with my co-author Jacob Russell, we wrote 4 articles during COVID about how the government was doing. And our argument was it wasn't doing too well. And the way we were talking about COVID was all wrong in our view. The public discourse was all wrong. I had the hardest time getting a contract for that book. We were turned down by Princeton, Oxford, with whom I have published numerous books over decades, and the University of Chicago. And I know people never name names. I always like naming names, especially with people who have done something that I think is disreputable. But I won't name names now. Anyway, we wrote the book. It's another book that took 5 years to write. We published it with MIT because someone in law and neuroscience gave me the name of this editor, and he was terrific. The book was named on the list of New Yorker Books of the Year for 2025. Now, the New Yorker is not exactly a populist publication, and it's populated by the kind of people that told us that we were all wrong, we were baby killers, that opening schools was a horrible idea, that masking was going to save the world. And of course, when Jacob called me and said the book's on the New Yorker list of best books for 2025, I said, come on, man, you got to be kidding me. Those people? So what's happened is the zeitgeist has basically turned in our direction. Nobody, as far as I can tell. I mean, there have been books now, Macedo and Lee published in the wake of COVID, a week after ours, and David Zweig had a book on closing schools. But I mean, the truth has all come out. The government blackballed people on Twitter and Facebook. Randy Weingarten had an open line to Rochelle Walensky at CDC. I mean, the whole thing was just, but that's not really our thesis. It's not about fact. It's a book that argues that the elite class globally, what people like to describe themselves as progressives, have a certain pathology about what they know, and most importantly, what you don't know, and why they're in a position to tell you what to do, and you should just shut up and listen. And we think that the thesis of the book is that attitude is what fuels populism.
Well, bring it back to our topic. I'm sure it's a great book and people should get it, but bring it back to our topic. We covered a lot. It was a great discussion, Dr. Patterson. Dennis, I really want to thank you for your time today, and we're looking forward to our next conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, you guys are great. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Lobes and Robes, How Neuroscience Can Change the World. This podcast is produced as a partnership between American University's Center for Neuroscience and Behavior and the Washington College of Law. If you'd like to reach us, you can email lobesandrobes@american.edu. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube for updates and additional content. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing and sharing it with others. We look forward to having you with us the next time.
This podcast was edited by Resonate Recordings.